Good day, strategy gamers. Welcome back to episode 8 of the Let's Play series of War in the East 2, Stalingrad to Berlin campaign. Where we left off last time was the turn summary of turn 4, and we've got quite a bit to go through today. We're going to touch on the metric screen and also introduce something we haven't looked at yet, which is fort levels. And this is actually a recommendation by one of our listeners, Alan W. on YouTube commented this, so we're going to do a bit of a dive into fortification levels and how they've impacted some of our results. So let's get right into it as we usually do with a review of battles that happened during the German ground movement phase. And to start, they really had battles in two areas of our front. The first was up here by Leningrad, and if you remember, we had a fortification unit actually sitting by itself here, as we had opted to pull back some of our forces as we found ourselves completely surrounded in this little pocket. And this was the 14th Fortified Region, and as you can see, they were unsuccessful in defending and ultimately surrendered due to the incredible odds they faced. The line behind the fortification unit, though, did hold quite well. They were halted at 750, so they probably weren't even close to breaking through there. So I think that's some good news. They also, on the east, just tried to push through this front, which is a little surprising considering some of the odds, but there are a couple of infantry divisions that made that attack. And I think this is probably them looking at the map starting to go, boy, we're getting a lot of pressure from the east. Is there anything we can do to relieve it? And I think we're going to have a lot of success here on this turn. Moving down the front line, this is kind of near the Smolensk front, as I've been referring to it. Really, when we started the campaign, if you recall correctly, all the way up to about here where the mouse is hovering, the Germans had advanced in their push on towards Moscow, right here. But we had held them off, as was pretty historical, and we had the objective of trying to cut in behind their lines of supply. And in doing so, we actually did surround a number of German units, which we'll finish off a couple of them probably this turn. Anyways, near the Smolensk front, they had some action. We had units kind of stretched along the border here. This particular rifle division was routed. It came under attack from a number of forces. There was a panzer division and 2 infantry divisions, so they were quite outnumbered. But they put up a pretty good fight nonetheless. When we look at ground losses, we do see that they managed to take out a number of Panzer IVs and Panzer IIIs, which was good to see. But they've now routed, and that is this unit right here. Down in this little stretch of the map, if you recall correctly, there was actually a Panzer division that made itself all the way out here to this hex. And what we were worried about was that Panzer division trying to push or interrupt the rail line or something like that that would further harry our efforts to get all of these units back into supply. So what we did is, even though they were pretty low supply and had some fatigue, we took these 2 divisions here and we actually placed them behind that panzer unit that had gotten separated to kind of force the Germans' hand to focus their efforts on moving our units as opposed to continuing a push and trying to have a breakout in this little pocket. And it worked successfully. The bulk of the fighting happened here over the phase of 4 battles, where we actually held the first assault. They didn't even get close. On the second assault, we again held, but we started taking some casualties. On the third, we held against the 205th Infantry Division, which was a different unit that they had not yet fought against. And then finally, the 360th did retreat when they combined their forces, and ultimately it looks like that 19th Panzer we had tried to separate had joined the fight, and it was simply too much for these guys to handle. Which, looking at those odds, that's very understandable. And over here we see that we had these 2 guards rifle units. They had both retreated And I actually need to go look. I thought maybe they were the same units that were defending there, but they weren't. So a total of 3 units we had that did retreat. And here, this was more so just down to these units. They were already stretched thin. They were low supply. They had high fatigue. That's what forced their losses. And really, they did not perform very well. We lost every armored fighting vehicle that we had in that unit. 21 T-34s and 5 T-70s were completely destroyed. We did knock out some of the German forces, but not many considering the numbers that were involved in this fight. Over to the east here on the Smolensk front, again, they made some efforts to try to break out some of their units. They continue to see success here in this pocket by just creating different openings in our line, but it's coming at a cost to them, right? So you look at this, and we were outnumbered 2-1, and they suffered 2-1 in terms of casualties, and they didn't break through on that attack. On the second attack, they had better luck because they had actually brought in more units to help with the offensive. But they took casualties just trying to get that one hex open. And even still, we're going to be able to repeat the same process where we'll be able to overwhelm them with numbers. We'll fill in that hole in the line again. We'll keep this unit cut off from being able to retreat. And we'll keep repeating that as long as we have to, because eventually these units, when they've finished surrounding and battling off these isolated units, they will move south, and they will then be able to put the pressure needed to break open this front, and we can continue our push on towards Smolensk. So there were a number of other engagements here where they just tried to take opportunities to push through. Here we held the first attack, we held the second attack, and then on the third attack, we actually did have one of our units rout and another retreat. So they've thrown a lot of energy into trying to push us back. Here, I actually think those 2 units began in this hex, but then were continuously pushed back. So when we look at the rest of the front lines, we actually didn't have any other engagements anywhere else on the front. So there's no other battles for us to really review. So we're now going to go through our normal steps of the turn as we would, and that begins with the air execution phase. So the question of the day, which I'm sure all of you are eager to hear, is, has the blizzard ended, and can we now do air operations? Well, let's find out. No attack tonight. The ground weather is heavy snow or snow, depending on where you are on the frontier. And when we look in the air, blizzard. So we are not going to be aggressive. We're going to stay in our current hold stance that we have with our aircraft, and we're not going to run any air doctrines. There's no point flying and having all of that support on during a blizzard. Before we get into moving past the air execution phase, though, I did want to take the time to go over the metrics screen, something that we had hoped to do in the previous 2 episodes but ran out of time. Actually, I'm going to hop back out. So you have these 3 tabs at the top of your UI, and map info, info screens, and admin. Admin, where you can do functions like save or preferences. Info screens, which is just kind of the, what's the best way to say this? The encyclopedia that exists behind this game are on these info screen tabs, where down to the pilot, down to the unit, down to the tank chassis, you can look at various details of what's being simulated in this game. And then map info is what we spend the majority of our time on, and using a lot of these shortcuts. For example, one of the very popular ones is T, which toggles the hex chips on and off so you can better see terrain. But back to info screens, we're going to go here, and this 4th icon from the left is metrics. And there's a number that we can go through and look at. We're not going to touch on every single one, but I really want to give the viewer a chance to see some of the ways that you can analyze the performance of your game. I will say one of the exciting things for many players that are attracted to this game is, oh, I want to look at all the data. I want to look at all the data. You open up a new game, turn 1, let me go and look at all of the metrics that I have. Most things are visualized here on this trended over time visualization, which means on turn 1, you just have one data point. And it can be a little underwhelming then when you first look at it. So I wanted to wait until we had some turns worth of data to really look at. And the first one that smacks us right in the face as soon as we open it up is the victory points that we have. And you can see here that we start it with 674, we maintain that, but we've actually been dropping victory points as the game has progressed. So this is something that in the coming episodes, we're going to take a little bit more of a focus on and say, how do we stop this a little? How do we maybe add in 1 or 2 strategic objectives as we finish the initial ones we had set to make sure that we reverse this trend? I'm fully expecting that we will, just kind of given the natural progression of this front in the campaign playing as the Soviets, but it's still something we'll start to take a little bit more of a look into in future episodes. You can then also see, okay, for the Germans, what was the highest they ever had in victory points? And here you see it was 674. And then sudden victory points, that stayed at 750. And order of battle is where you start to get to some of the really interesting ones related to the battles and your forces and the military that you are leading in this game. So the first is just the total number of men that each side has. And this, again, is very historical in how these trends progressed of this huge ramp up with the Soviets. And this is going to continue for quite a while. And this now gradual decline of overall forces for the Germans. And this stayed very cyclical as well, where in the winter months especially, but beginning in fall and spring too, you would usually see a lot of these metrics for the Germans decline. And then really the first couple of years of the war in the summer is when you usually saw these numbers spike up a little as the Germans prepared various offensives. Most of them not being decisive or strategic in the Eastern Front as they had hoped. And then the historical outcome that we all know happened because of it. For example, the next one that would historically happen that we have coming up in our campaign here would be the Germans' Battle of Kursk, where they really built up their forces to try to do this decisive push on this wide, what they saw as kind of this perfect tank battle, this huge open ground. They were going to lead this massive offensive and break through the Soviet lines. And they really wanted to leverage some of the new technologies they had in armor and tank design that they did not have as strongly on especially the beginning in the first year of the war, with things such as the King Tiger, the Panther, and these other innovations that they had with technology. They wanted to mass up as much of them as they possibly could on the front line for this offensive. The problem was the Soviets saw it coming from miles away, and they were able to prepare sufficient defensive positions. And to this day, it is the largest tank battle that has ever occurred in human history. But in the summers is when you would see this line spike up often for the Germans as they prepared for those types of initiatives or decisive battles that they hoped would turn the tide of the war. But right now we see a decline. You can then go through and look at total guns. This has stayed pretty flat. Armored fighting vehicles have actually increased for both sides. And then total aircraft, look at this. That's quite incredible when you just see those side by side, right? The overall total aircraft that the Soviets began producing. These same metrics you can also look at for map, theater box, and transfer. So as a reminder, map is everything that we're dealing with in each of our turns where we're moving the actual units on the map. That's what the game refers to as map. Theater boxes are the units that we have deployed to the theater boxes, another topic that we've covered, such as the Far East or the Northern Front simulating Scandinavian battles. And this would then just show you in the theater boxes what are the trends of these different units. So here you see the Soviets have had this huge increase in armored fighting vehicles, whereas the Germans have not. So this is probably a good indication, and probably one of your better insights that you have as a player in the game, to see how, if to any degree, the opponent is prioritizing their theater boxes. You can't see the specific theater box, but you can at least see how they're balancing the needs of the on-map demands and their theater box demands. Losses is one that can be a little disheartening to look at sometimes, depending on how the game has been going for you. But here you see the number of men that have been lost in fighting each turn, and you see that the last turn for both us and the Germans saw a decline in the number of men lost in battles. However, it was much more of a decline for the Germans than it was for us. You can go through and see the same here for guns, armored fighting vehicles. So you see that in turns 3 and 4, we very heavily leveraged our tanks and other armored fighting vehicles in battles. This one, I'm actually going to switch over here to aircraft operational losses. I think this is very telling, right? Is at the very beginning, I did not do an appropriate job of looking at, hey, the weather might impact how well World War II airplanes fly and how effective they are. And that's where we saw these just astronomical losses to operations of aircraft. And when we look at total aircraft loss, so we had 250 in turn 1 of operational losses out of a total of 390. So more than half of our total losses in aircraft that first turn came from operational. And then we see that the number of combat aircraft losses in turn 2 was much higher, as the Germans really kind of focused on air superiority. Moving right along, though, there's also a little tab for production. And this doesn't get into any degree of granularity, but it allows you to see, for some of the more strategic assets, such as oil supplies, fuel supplies, how are they trending for each of the sides. So here you see supplies going up, oil going down for the Soviets, but staying flat for the Germans. And another one would be the Manpower Pool, where you see this increase for the Soviets, but then this decline and kind of flattening of the Germans in terms of manpower. And then over here you have the theater boxes, where you can actually see, for you yourself, the player, right, how have you trended in terms of men that you have sent to the Far East, as an example. And this makes sense because if you remember, in turn 3, we first introduced theater boxes, and that's when we begin to see this increase in the number of men that are provisioned out to the Far East front. In the Northern front, we should see then a similar story, right? It was in turn 3 that we started sending them to the Northern front. The little bit of delay, by the way, is some forces take longer to get to different theater boxes based off the geography. And then Soviet reserves are just the forces we have in reserve. It's not too much insight to be gained from this yet, but over time this becomes much more valuable. One thing that you'll note is that when we are working with the theater boxes, we were really trying to focus on sending infantry divisions, which were very well equipped and ready for battle, to the various theater boxes, but we did not commit any of our armored divisions, any of our tank corps, anything like that, to those theater boxes. That's why in the reserve graph, it shows that we've seen this very steady increase in our reserves for armored fighting vehicles. So that's kind of my breakdown of the metrics screen. It's nothing too terribly scientific in how I've gone over that, but it's one of those, I'd say, highlights of this game, that that level of granularity of data you can get down to, you can track, you can see it over time, how it progresses, etc. Another similar one that a lot of folks like about this game is the production screen, which we will cover in either next episode or the episode following, depending on how much time we have left. Turn 5, we're probably going to try to keep to 2 episodes, so I don't know if we'll have enough time in the next episode 9, which will be the second half of this turn. So getting right into this with our various air units, what we want to do is the same as we had previously done, and we want to switch the status of these units over to rest. So we're just going to go through and do that. We've gotten quite good at this considering the blizzards just never end in Russia. Keep going right on through these. I really am looking forward for the weather to take a turn and for us to be able to get into some more specific air missions and some of the capabilities that come with that. Now, there certainly would be a thought for, in some areas of our line, we've actually made notable progress in advancing. And when you do that, you do want to make sure that you have this button, if you will, this drop-down option, on the right settings. This is the Air Army stance is kind of a good way to think about it. I'm not sure if that's how it's referred to in the manual. I can't remember. But this indicates to that unit, specifically if you're using the AI assist, by the way, it specifies, are they going to relocate to other air bases? And under what rule set will they? So hold just means they're going to stay. No matter what happens, they're going to stay in the air bases that they have. Flexible means if the front line gets pushed back, as in we're losing on the front line, they may move the units in the rear. If we're advancing, they may move them up towards the front. And there's some different rules on how reserves and such work when you're in a flexible stance. Retreat and advance are rather similar as you would expect, whereas just if you're set in an advanced setting, they will always try to advance up to the nearest air base that they can then effectively run their air missions. Whereas retreat says, hey, we need to stay further away from the front line because an example would be the beginning of the war in the summer of 1941. You would want this on retreat for the Soviets to make sure that all of your air bases simply didn't get overrun with your air armies, and you would then have them retreat. Right, retreat back to air bases that were in more defensive positions. Keep going on rest. What I was getting at with that, though, is with the weather, even though we've had advances in our front line, we don't want to necessarily change that stance, because when they do relocate to new air bases and new operational areas, they have to fly the planes there, right? And flying the planes to transfer them, we don't want any losses with the weather, because flying in a blizzard is bad, as we have learned. Okay, so we've gone through and set our various air armies and their status. So now we're going to go ahead and execute our air directives. We'll give this just a minute here to run through. I must have missed one because it looks like we did fly some sorties. I'm glad that it wasn't too bad in terms of losses. But still, that feels like 15 airframes we didn't have to lose. Oh my gosh, now we're running some more. And that makes sense, because if you recall, right, we're going through, each day has a day and a night phase, so 7 days, total of 14 phases is what it's simulating through. Okay, so yeah, let's see if we can find out what happened here. It looks like I missed these 3. Actually, even though I had it on hold, I think the AI still saw an opportunity to run some recon flights. Which I'll be brutally honest here, even though we lost 22 aircraft, the fact that we ran 100 sorties worth of recon, I'm not terribly upset with, because we haven't run recon in a long time, and hopefully that gives us some good indication of what we're up against. We've run into a number of occasions where we advance and break out through a line, and we're faced with a couple divisions we can't even ID, and we don't even know what they have. So I think that's probably for the best. So we are now in the ground turn, and we're going to start by checking to make sure that our ground support is turned off, which it is. That's right up here on the very top of the bar. And we're also going to just make sure that right off the bat we allow the AI to manage our depots. And now we're going to start looking at where do we want to advance in the Leningrad area of operations. Where do we want to pick our battles, and where are the weak points for us to advance. Now, as I mentioned, we're going to, per Alan's suggestion, take a look at forts this turn. And the hotkey for forts is F. And for fortification levels, I should be specific about that because they're not necessarily a fort. But now we see these little numbers pop up with this fortification icon above each hex that has units within it. And I'm going to real quick go through. They're on a scale of 1 to 5. And level 1 is when a unit moves into a hex and it stays there for the turn. That's simulating the ground forces saying, okay, I'm going to dig a couple of foxholes. If I have armored fighting vehicles or if I have artillery, I'm going to get them in a position, and I might add some camouflage to them. So it's just kind of the most basic of, you know what, I'm at the very least going to stay here for a night, a couple of days, what have you. Let me make sure that I'm just not standing out in the open. That's level 1. And for most units, it takes 1 week to get to that level. Sometimes it might take 2. There's actually calculations that happen in the background based off of a construction value that each unit has that is then further affected by things like fatigue, movement points remaining, etc. So if you have a high fatigue unit that's at, let's just say, half strength, and it has no movement points left and it moves up into a new hex, it probably won't reach level 1 fortification in that turn because it is so tired. There are so few men available to dig all those foxholes or to add any camouflage, etc. It'll probably just stay at 0, right? Level 2 is where you start to get to the level of, you can visualize this, of the men building some trenches and making sure that pretty much your defensive positions have various levels of camouflage, right? So maybe you're on a tree line by a forest, or you're sitting in a city or hex tile, right? And you're trying to camouflage yourself around the urban setting. That's what level 2 is. And that, again, usually takes about 1 or 2 weeks to achieve. Level 3 is where you start to really get into some of the more complex defensive positions. And I think 3 is kind of the cutoff when I think about when it's really going to be difficult for the assault. Because level 3 is when you have those connected trench works. And the visualization there is any movie you've ever seen about the Western Front in World War I, right? The trench lines just going for miles. That's kind of the visualization that I'd paint for you, right? That's the level that they've achieved. They've been there for 3 to 6 weeks, and they've been able to dig these fortifications. And you also start building some, they're not maybe necessarily bunkers, but say sandbag pillboxes or things like this, where you've built up above the ground as well fortifications for things like your anti-tank guns. And you have much more extensive camouflage. Level 4 and level 5 are the much more complex ones. They actually require some kind of engineering supportive units to achieve those levels. And that's when you do start getting into the, say, concrete, actually built out bunkers or defensive structures, right? It's what you think about in the beaches of Normandy and what the Germans had prepared there. Those types of fortifications are what you start to get to with levels 4 and 5. And the time it takes to get to those is measured in months, usually at least 3 months. And on the Eastern Front, those situations were rare, is probably just a good way to put it, because the entire front did so frequently prove to be well, not static. It was very fluid, right? That having that much time was pretty rare. So these are the fortification levels. They have, as you would imagine, measurable benefits to the defender the higher that number is when you're attacking. And I'm going to hop away from the Leningrad row front to kind of demonstrate this. Is if you remember from the last episode, we were talking about that as we move down here, we're looking for these different areas where we can just push through, right? Where we can just break through one of these pockets. And I think this is a good visualization of why we say that, because look at all of these areas where they either don't have any longer a fortification level, right? Because we've pushed the unit back, or the fortification level is 1 because we've pushed them back, and the fortification levels, I should mention this as well, they actually do deteriorate given certain circumstances, whether that be weather, the defending unit leaving the hex, etc. When we pushed this unit out of this hex in the previous turn, if we had actually taken the hex, then these fortification levels the Germans have, they actually would have been just removed, eliminated and removed to 0. And over here, this was another one where we had actually pushed them back, but we didn't have enough movement points to necessarily advance into the hex. So the Germans have brought in reinforcements, but now there is this stack of units here that don't have any fortification bonus. So that's why as we were looking at this front, we kept trying to find these little weak points where we knew we weren't going to push the entire line back, but what we wanted to do was to force them to respond to the push and to break holes into their fortification levels. And that's what we've been doing down here. So now we're going to go back to the Leningrad front and take another look at this and say, okay, where can we try to break through? Because we now have this objective of they've tried to push on Leningrad. They're probably not going to make or do anything, I say in time, but realistically it's probably too late even for that. So now what we want to do is with this massive force we have here, break through going east to west. Just a straight line, get right behind these units and do the same thing we did near Smolensk, because even if we're not going to envelop their entire force, force them to make the decision to leave a couple of units behind to slow our advance, which then we can encircle and eliminate them from the theater of operations, right? Just a complete collapse of that unit because we have surrounded them and they have surrendered. And right off the bat, I think the easiest to see is these 3 hexes along the entire front. This is where we will strike, right? They have the lowest fortification levels, and there's also a couple of hexes here where there's just not that, their defensive combat value is pretty low. I think these 2 in particular are going to be where we hit this turn. The other one we might consider would be here, simply because we can get in behind it with one of these units and then be attacking from both sides. So let's now start with those actions. And I think we'll begin by saying, can these 2 divisions break through here? And I think it's pretty clear they can. They retreated, and overall, a great success. We don't have enough movement points to move into that hex, though, which is a little unfortunate, but okay, fair enough. Now what we're going to do is look to see, can we push back these units? And that's 1 to 1. So I think what we might do, actually, is we're going to bring up the 265th, and we're going to put back into reserves this unit, right? They have very high fatigue and almost no combat preparation left. But we have units here that don't have fatigue, and they're fresh, and they're ready to go. So now we're going to take those 2 units that we just brought up, and we're going to, might need all 3 then. We're going to try to break through with this unit. And so we did. Excellent news. The advance continues. Now we're going to take these units. Ooh, that's just 1-to-1. And if we go here, that's 2-to-1. So we'll do that. They've retreated as well. And look where they retreated to. I was really hoping this was the case. But I think I made a bit of an error. You see, had I moved into that hex, the fortification level would have been eliminated. But now, because I did not do that, when we attack them, they're going to have fortifications of level 2. That was quite the error on my part. But let's see if we can... Yeah, let's first move these up. Let's attack there. And it looks like we are successful. And they retreated. So now which unit do we move up? I don't know that we can move any of them up. Okay. That's fine. Can these guys get up there? I don't think they can. But can we do anything here? Nope. This is fine. Okay, so we've made some great progress there. This unit we had in reserves to try to recoup a little. We're going to keep it there, but we will move it up to the front, closer to the front line, so it's ready for the next couple of turns. So we've had some great success here. Really happy with how that's gone. This unit we're going to move up towards the front. I think we'll move them. We'll move them here. Again, even if they do break through in any of these 2 hexes, it's not going to necessarily be enough to be decisive and change anything. But I just want to be a little cautious and show enough force that they don't try it. Okay, so we've started to break through here, and again, the benefit is now these units, they don't have a defensive line to hold to prevent us from moving into those hexes next turn. When we keep going down south here, you know, that is so high, but I wonder if we can do it. Nope, not even close, actually. Okay. Down here, there's no fort, but it's such a high defensive value, we're not going to have any luck. And down here, this is a panzer and infantry division. It's just too strong. Right, so I don't think we're going to be able to push through anything here. This is where we will have our success. We're going to keep going with that into the next turn. Moving down south is where we get really interesting here, right? And remember, they've had this kind of line here of where we haven't been able to cut them off, and I found this very interesting. They had these fortification levels at 4, and I hadn't thought to look at this, but I do wonder if all along this line, if they weren't all 4s, and that's why we had such difficulty perhaps the first time trying to break through here. But now what we are going to do is, because they've given us this opportunity essentially, we're going to move these units up here and say, look, if you want to get out, you're going to have to fight your way out, right? If you want to be reconnected here again to your supply line, that's fine, but you've got to make the effort and do it. And we'll also move up this unit since that belongs to that army. Normally I might move this guy up, but if we move him up, it's going to be an easy counterattack for the Germans to hit a unit that is in medium to low supply. So instead what I'll do is these 2 army groups will advance them west to expand the front line here. And again, I think I'll leave this as is, because even if they move this direction, they're not moving towards anything. They're getting further away from their own lines. Let them. They can't really do any damage, is how I look at that situation. And we're not going to be able to break through here, but I bet you we could break through right here. Let's look at that fortification level though. Yeah, it is 3. But we should have plenty to push through. Alright, they've surrendered. And we got the air base depot as well. So that was an excellent victory. We're going to move right into that hex. Look at that. And now we get one more crossroads of a rail supply, right? That's excellent news. So now anything that was going to come to these units from depots here in the north has to go down this route. This is no longer an option for them. So that's some good news for us. We will, I think, just move up the HQ one here just to keep them close. And we'll do the same over here. Oh, wait a minute. So the northwest front has, wait a minute, they have units all the way over here. I wonder if this is part of the 6th Army, and that's what we're seeing for the northwest front. Okay, so they'll be fine there then, I suppose. And I'm just going to do a bit of rebalancing here. I'm going to move this rifle brigade up. Just then we have 2 and 2. This was more of a concern when they had this hex occupied and could hit it from 2 different hexes. Okay. Okay, very good, very good. Now we're going to continue our advance here. Moving those units up. And we're just going to start building out a bit of a frontier. Right? They'll stay there because we still have these units kind of protecting the rear. Move this unit up just 1. Move them up 1. They're fort level 0, but we just don't have enough strength. That's fine. Here we should be able to have some success, though. Alright, so they were routed. That's a very good outcome for us, of course. And we'll now move these units up. We'll move these units up. We're going to keep this whole army here together, right? That makes sense. And I think what we'll do now is we'll advance this mechanized corps down. Ah, that's why we couldn't move into that hex. That makes sense. We're going to start moving our forces up here. This is part of that army, but we'll use it to hold that line right now. Yeah, that works. That works. A couple of these units are still in poor supply, so we might leave those as is. Do wonder. Yeah, let's attack this, and this is where they have an HQ too. And we captured their depot. Look at that. Crossroads, captured a depot, and pushed back the HQ. Could you ask for much more? I don't think you could. Okay. Here we have 2 infantry divisions. I bet you one of these is a panzer division here, because they had 3 in total, and I only know the location of 1 right now. And we're going to leave this open, again, just as we have, because we need to continue getting reinforcements into these units. Supplies, I mean. And if I'm remembering correctly, the previous turn, all of these units were in red in terms of their condition of supply. So if they've been all bumped up to orange, that means they are coming, right? It's just taking some time. Trying to refill anything from 0 up to 100% takes time. So that we're going to maintain our patience here at this front, and we're just going to acknowledge that we're not going to push south. And again, one of the benefits we have there is we're pretty well defended, and so are the Germans, so we're not going to gain much by throwing away units attacking them. Okay. So that wraps up all of our actions there. I think what we'll do is we'll finish going through these pockets here north of Smolensk, and then we'll close the episode out. So let's see how far we can get with these. This unit is still sitting in good supply. And even though we have, it's not even an advantage, my goodness. So we simply must wait for their supplies to continue deteriorating. These units, however, I think we can probably have some luck against. So let's attack this unit, right? Maybe do these first? I think we'll do these first. So we just take those units. Take this as well. This guy. 34 to 7.8. Let's do that. And they surrendered. Excellent. Excellent news. So they're off the map. They are off the map. So move them up to help here. We can now move this unit down, move this unit down, and we can start regrouping some of these back into their armies. So all around good news there. And if we take just these, 28 to 3.5, I like those odds. Whoa. Yeah, retreated. Excellent. Excellent news. And alright, so we're gonna have to wait another turn to finish that particular pocket off. Which isn't terrible news. I mean, that's okay. We can be a little patient. That's fine. They're not going anywhere. So it's okay that we're gonna wait a little. Here their fort levels are at 1, and I think we might just have a bit of an advantage here. So let's press that. Alright, and we captured the depot that was there in that city. And we routed them. So that's a big win for us. Move these units up. And let's actually see. I think we can do something similar right here. These are light woods. We get into heavy woods in a lot of these hexes, though. But those are not in great supply, are they? Let's see. 17 to 6, we'll do it. Alright, so they've retreated. Good news. Good news. And just out of curiosity. Nope, not enough. That's fine. Now we need to fill in this hole here, which is as expected. So I think we're going to take this one. And oh, their fatigue is high though. My goodness. We'll take the 415th. And we'll take the 29th Guard, and we'll move them here. We'll move down these units. Move these units down as well. Okay. That's some good progress. Good. And let's see if we can't continue a bit of a counterattack here. Nope, not enough. And yeah, fort's fine. They retreat it. Good news. And we're going to push these units up. We're also going to push these up. We now find ourselves in a position where maybe we can break through there. try it. They retreated. That was also successful. If we take all of these, let's push them out. They retreated too. Alright, so now all along this front we have had success. I'm going to move that unit here. Move them down as well. I'm going to go and occupy that hex, I think. Yeah, they're not going to have enough to do any type of counterattack. Those are police infantry divisions. Interesting. All right. And I think here's where we're going to call the episode to a close. As we start going down this line, we're going to start to bleed into decisions that will impact the southern Stalingrad front. And I'm very happy with the high note that we're leaving the Smolensk front on. Just look at this visual here. 1, 2, 3, 4 areas in their line where they can't even cover it, and multiple areas where the defensive combat value is less than 15. And we have entire armies up here. We have 3 armies that are currently blocking off these divisions that have been encircled, arguably 4 armies, who we can start deploying to this front. I know that in the last turn we had talked about how it was the 5th Army. We want it to move east to west and bring over here to this front. Still want to do that, but we need to get rid of this pocket first. So once this is gone, we'll continue moving them over. And this unit we may actually just reassign to one of the armies that it's nearer to. I don't know if it's going to be worth that lagging behind. Maybe it will be. We'll see how that plays out. But this is going to wrap up this episode of our playthrough of War in the East 2 Stalingrad to Berlin campaign. As always, I want to thank you for your time to watch this. I hope you've been enjoying it. If you have any questions, comments, or feedback for the series, please leave them in the comments section. I really do appreciate and value everything you guys have to add and contribute. And it's been a blast so far learning this game hand in hand with all of you. And I hope that this approach makes it a little less daunting to step into the game and to get to know it a little better. As always, take care and have yourselves an excellent day, strategy gamers. Bye now.